So welcome back for another discussion of the book Agile Principles for Business by James S. Wright. I'm here with James once again for a discussion on chapter 3, where we talk about Agile. So in the first two chapters, you discussed very different situations. Chapter 1 dealt with World War II. Chapter 2 dealt with your experience at iOmega. What are the high-level lessons you think we should take from those two chapters as we go into chapter 3?
So the main thing was that if you want to do something that hasn't been done before, if you need to make a big difference, you have to make a big difference, right? You have to make a change. And both iOmega and the Allied Armed Forces made a huge change. The one I focused on with the Allies was how they added the airborne component to their fighting forces. That was something that hadn't been done until the Nazis did it in 1939. And it had only been, it was still very, very new. They had to learn how to do it as they did it. And even the night, the week before they went out, they still weren't sure if it was the right thing to do or not. That's how new it was. At iOmega, it was a very similar situation where they took a company that was very established and they said, we're going to have to change things around completely. The way we look at products, we look at our customers, the way we organize our company. That's the only way they survive. But the principles were all pretty much the same, right? But it was scary to everybody. The interesting similarity was doing the analysis at the time frame. It took both of them between 18 and 24 months to get through that transition. And in Agile coaching experience, even though I've seen it happen, sometimes as fast as 3 to 6 months, it doesn't become ingrained in the DNA of the organization for at least 18 to 24 months. So maybe that's just a universal guideline.
Yeah, I think from what I'm seeing, as I, usher this organization through an agile transformation, there's a lot of turnover as new people come in who are more aligned with that kind of work, and people who kind of self-select or are selected in some cases to move on to other things.
Well, that was one of the big lessons from the paratroop group, is that they couldn't take just anybody. They could only take the people who wanted to do it. Mm-hmm. And they had special training. And that's the way with his Agile people. You have to take people that want to do it. You have to train them differently than everybody else. And my experience firsthand is about, if you take like an existing company and do a transformation, my experience is about 10% of the people just won't convert. As we'll talk about in this chapter, they want to be a taxi driver, they want to be a bus driver. Mm-hmm. And if that's the way it is, then don't force them to do something they don't want to do. Let them go someplace and drive a bus.
So we might as well talk about that, because I thought that was a really interesting section of this chapter where you kind of differentiate between the buses and the taxis. So do you want to explain what that's about?
Yeah. So this goes back to about 2015, right after I published my book, Scrum Marketing. I started doing a lot of training courses, and I didn't want to do the training like they did, like if you went to a Scrum Master class or you went to another one, Agile course. I wanted to be kind of discipline independent. So whether you're in software or in business management or in advertising or in whatever, it would be applicable. And so I had to come up with my own set of analogies. And so I don't know how I found it, but I found, taxi driving and bus driving, looks the same. You're sitting down, you're holding on to a wheel, and you got people in the back. But one has to make his own way and find out which way she's going, and the other one, has a route. And that was a pretty good way to describe the two ways of doing business. One where you do whatever you're told, and you get evaluated, how on time you are. The other one, you get told a destination, and it's up to you to find the best way to get there. That's kind of what Agile's. So I think to start with, you have to think of what Agile really is. And in the book, I offer two different definitions for agility, but I don't offer them next to each other. And that's probably the biggest mistake I made. So in one place I say that, I think it's in chapter 4, maybe it's in this chapter, that, well, let's see, yeah, it's in chapter 3, I got it right here. I said, if it's impossible to have a perfect project plan or strategic plan, and if being off by just a minute percentage could doom you to failure, what's the answer? Course correct as you go. That's the simplest explanation I can give you for business agility. That's what I wrote in the book. So the whole idea is the flexibility piece, right? Based upon the latest information you know. But the second piece of agility is the distributed accountability. And I think that for real kind of agility that we're talking about, business agility, whether it's in one discipline or another, it has to be based upon those two things: accountability, so that people can make decisions, and the flexibility as they go. I think those are the two components we're talking about. And so if we look at the story about D-Day, we saw that all over the place because the plans didn't work very well. But the training taught them how to do those things, how to improvise, how to work with what you got. The planning did include all of the defined objectives and how if everybody met their objectives, then everything would work out. The same thing happened with iOmega, right? They defined where they wanted to go, what they wanted to build. Along the way, they had to make a whole lot of changes. Even though they've been in that industry for 15 years at that point, they still had a lot to learn based upon these new, sets of objectives they set for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I like the description about the flexibility between the bus and the taxi, because the buses tend to run on a route, right? They have a specific route that they're going to follow every single time, and the taxis go wherever it is that you want to go, right? They'll take you home, they'll take you to the bar, they'll take you to the store, wherever you want to go. And this is one of the things that I was thinking about when I was, thinking about this chapter was, and I know this is probably going to have, some people at least looking at me like I'm a two-headed monster or something, some kind of a swamp beast. But I've never personally liked the term roadmap. And a lot of people want to use that term. And what I'm thinking about, whenever I think about a roadmap, right, I know that people are thinking, okay, we want to set a destination somewhere, out in the future. We want to get to that place. But if you look at a roadmap, there's routes that take you to each of the places on that map, right? And there's no deviation. Like you can't just cut across the field unless you're in a 4x4 or something. You're not cutting across an entire state to get to your destination without taking the roads that go there.
I agree that the roadmap is kind of a poor choice of names for what we're talking about, because an agile company should be willing to change their plans. And I suggest later in the book monthly. It should be all of the portfolio, all the product plans should have a chance to be updated on a monthly basis, and more so if needed. Roadmap has this idea that, it gets back to the concept in chapter 3, that there's this perfect path to take.
Yes.
And we should stay on the path. And how many times you've been in a meeting where the boss says, why are we behind? Why aren't we where I wanted to be by now? Where are the 5 features I needed by today? I've said that in the past. Yeah. But information changes. and customers tell you things along the way. And I think for the viewers, there's a great video on YouTube. It's called the Nordstrom Innovation Lab.
Mhm.
I think it's about 7 minutes and 21 seconds. I probably watched it about 120 times because I've used it in classes a lot. And in it, they go into a Nordstrom store. I showed it to you, I think, right?
Yeah.
When you were the release engineer, and I was the coach, right? Well, the big takeaway, there are a lot of takeaways from it. It teaches a lot of really good ideas. It doesn't teach it the way that, I mean, I would really like to have a 1 minute summary at the end to draw everything out. But if you watch the video, you can see what's going on. But the big lesson on the product planning side is that if you deliver the most important things, you don't have to deliver everything.
Mhm.
But you don't know what the most important things are until you talk to real customers.
Yep.
Until you ship real stuff and see, then you can find out what your hypotheses are correct or not, right? So if we use the taxi analogy, there are times when the passenger wants you as the taxi driver to take them to someplace fun, and you might be driving down the road having a conversation with them, and you might find out, well, the place that they picked might not be the best place in your town, and there might be a better place for them to go. Or maybe you drive by and you see there's an open air concert in the park as you drive by, and that might be the best place for that person to go, right? Anyways, yeah, it doesn't really matter if you finish all the stuff in your roadmap. It really matters if your customers buy your product and they like it.
Mhm.
So what if the very first release of your product is the one they like the most and they don't want any changes to it? I mean, would you go into a room and say, I'm so upset, we sold too much, now we have no idea what to make next? I'm sure there are some people out there that would say that because they're so used to the idea of we have to have release 1 on this date and release 2 on this date and release 3 here. You don't know what you need until you get out there and start doing it. And the market changes. So even if you think you got it all understood, well, maybe you're wrong just because now it's Tuesday.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I've read a lot of reviews on like apps on the Apple App Store where, somebody would suggest an app to me and I'd go look at it on the App Store, and then I don't know why I do this, but I like to read through the reviews to see what other people think about it. And it's surprising to me how many times you'll find people in those reviews saying, "Oh, it was much better whenever they first released it. Oh, this last update is just crap. It's, you might as well not even use it anymore. It's just terrible now. It used to be great and now it's just awful." And I thought, it doesn't really take that much to just not do anything. Like,
Well,
if you're selling, like just wait until you get feedback from customers that say, we want this.
Later in the strategy chapter, I actually do have an example of a company that added one more feature, and that one more feature killed the entire product. But I think what we're saying is that we care more about the outcome than we care about the output.
That's right.
And the outcome is for making customers happy and for paying your employees, et cetera, hopefully making some profit. But those things might change. As you recall from chapter 2 with iOmega, when the zip drive first came out, it was a gigantic success. Well, that same product that was a gigantic success in 1995, well, in 2023, it's not even relevant anymore. If you had a zip drive on your desk, it would be a nuisance. It's taken up way too much space, and 100 megabytes. I can't even put the recording of this podcast on it.
Yep.
So, things change, and the more you sit down and acknowledge what I know today is not going to be sufficient for tomorrow, and what I know today might be wrong for today. Once you admit that to yourself, now you're able to learn. And again, later in the book, I have a quote that I love from one of my clients. And it's better to be a learning company than a knowing company.
Mhm.
Never hear companies brag about how much they know and how much expertise they have. After doing all the research for this book, and I'm thinking, well, that just means you're going to die, because that knowledge is going to get you blind to what you need to see to make the changes you need to make.
Yep. Yep. I know better than the customer does. Don't worry about, we don't need feedback from them. You talked a little bit about your experience with what we now call waterfall project management type stuff. So what do you think the pros and cons are for building a product using waterfall versus Agile?
Well, at this stage of my career, I don't think there are any real advantages to waterfall. The waterfall approach, what the perceived advantages are, is control by management, because they know what's happening, they dictate what happens, they have control over the different phases of development. It makes it easier to budget, etc. But I don't think any of those are real advantages in the real world. That's my short answer.
One of the things that I tend to tell people whenever they ask me about, should we use Agile to do this project? Typically what I'll ask them is, well, do you already know what you want to build? And if they say, yes, I already know exactly what I want to build, then you don't need Agile to do that. You can do that with project management, and you can save yourself the headache of all the.
Well, I often tell people, if you want to improve things by 10%, just get really good at micromanagement. You can squeeze out 10% really easy. Yep. But if you want to build a company that has staying power, then don't ever micromanage. Yep. So what you're saying is, I suppose, correct in that, waterfall works to a certain extent for some things more than others. For example, if I wanted to build a house, I do not want my carpenters to be experimenting with the design. I want them to take what's, in the blueprint and build that. But in the design process, I want them to be agile. I want the engineers and I want the architects to be thinking about new ways, looking for innovation, and going through an iterative process on how they do stuff. So, in a waterfall thing, but again, even it's not pure waterfall, because they're delivering incremental value, right? They do the foundation, and then they do the framing, and you have more today than you had. If they built it all in a factory and delivered it, then that would be pure waterfall. But if you want to build an organization that can survive over time, and you want it to be something that can be as flexible as what's necessary in today's dynamic world, then I don't think there are any advantages to waterfall anymore.
Yeah,
the more
that's right.
The more predictable the discipline, the better it works. For example, if I was in a corporate accounting group and I had 10 accountants and we were working the financials and we had to close every month on the 5th of each month for the previous month, and we had reporting every quarter and then an annual report, then maybe you could be waterfallish there and get by just fine and have that repeat over and over again every year and so forth. The more creative you need to be, probably the more it becomes a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if you're going to be involved in software development in this year or any year after this, it's almost imperative now that you learn how to become agile, because I was just talking about this with somebody else the other day, just yesterday, I think. We were looking at, for 22 years, they said the speed at which, the acceleration at which technology is advancing is exponential, right? But now that you've introduced AI into the whole Chat GPT thing, and all these different AI models that they have out there, it is incredible just to look at the last 6 months, what's, the amount of changes in technology that have happened just in the last 6 months. I mean, you can do, I made a book for my dad. I made a book cover that looks like an oil painting with a cowboy sitting in front of a mountain range. And I just did it by typing into the AI thing, and it spat out a couple of different images. And I was like, oh, that one looks pretty good. I mean, it's unbelievable what you can do.
Well, I plan on publishing a paper this summer where I'm going to be I'm analyzing the ways that some technologies change. Well, technologies change in bursts, and how I'm looking at 40-year chunks, and how during some 40-year periods the technology didn't change hardly at all, and other technologies changed quite a bit. For example, in one of the examples in the paper is that in 1982, when I flew away to university for the first time, I flew from the West Coast to the East Coast. One of my legs was in a Boeing 737. And 40 years later, summer of 2022, I took an airplane flight. Guess what kind of plane it was on? 737, flying the same speed. It was a little bit more fuel efficient, this one than that one, but it was the same plane. Well, the same 40 years, what happened to communications? What happened to computers? All right. Houses look the same in the same 40 years. Cars look roughly the same 40 years. But if you go 40 years before that, wow, 1942, cars were very different, right?
Yeah.
A lot of things were very different. So, some things go at different speeds than others, but it's kind of hard to predict what the next 10 years is going to have. Or back in 1982, what to predict what's going to happen by 1992. Or, I remember in 1994, I was using the internet. Well, I'll tell you this quick story. 1993, I was on a discussion board, and someone put out the question about how do I do this on my computer? And I was at a company that was making and selling software, and I said, you can do that 3 different ways. You can do it like this, you can do it like this, you can do it like that. And the last one was using a piece of software. And I said, now, for your example, my company sells that piece of software. You can buy it from me, or you can buy it from 10 or 15 other people. I got a flaming email back saying, how dare you try to sell something on the internet? The internet's supposed to be a pure place of just the exchange of ideas with no commerce. That was 1993. By 1996, would anybody say that about the internet?
Not at all.
Things can change rapidly, even for people that are so-called experts.
Yeah.
And even if they don't change technologically, they can change in the marketplace based upon who a company uses to be their spokesperson, or who wins an election, or which football team wins the championship, or what famous person says a particular thing. I mean, here's a quick anecdote that doesn't mean much at all, but I drive a lot. I worked at it for a company that was headquartered in LA. I live in Northern California, so I drove to LA a lot. And one particular year, about 2.5 years ago, I started noticing that I saw a whole lot of Range Rovers on the road. Now, Range Rover is an expensive car. It seemed like most of them were in that off-white kind of cream color. But I just thought, in just like the last 6 months, there are so many on the road, and I didn't used to see them very much before. Well, I asked one of my employees about that at lunch, and he goes, oh, well, Kim Kardashian has one, so everybody's buying them. Well, I don't know. Did Range Rover go out there and say, let's get Kim Kardashian to drive our car, and that'll improve our sales by this much? I haven't done any research on it, but who would have guessed that?
Yeah. Yeah. There's no telling what may spark a new trend sometimes. It's just, it's kind of crazy where these things come from. The whole AI model thing is, you know, there are certain things that you have the early adopters and the, you know, that breakdown. There's like I forget what it's called, but there's a breakdown of the adoption, the types of
Yeah. So
adoption.
the book you're thinking of is Crossing the Chasm by Moore. I
Mhm.
think it's from 1993. It goes in that in a lot of detail, and a lot of his theory back then is still very valid today.
Yeah. It's just, it's incredible to me that and I won't name the organization that I'm working with right now, but the organization that I am working with right now is a pretty conservative organization whenever it comes to this kind of stuff. And, you know, just in the last
Late
month,
adopter.
yeah, they just in the last month, they've already said that they want to look at ways to incorporate, you know, Chat GPT into some of the stuff. And I'm thinking, wow, that's pretty cool that they're already starting to think about that, you know.
I remember in the early 90s, maybe late 80s. And my father was a computer guy forever. I was a computer guy. My mother came to me and she said, "Hey, I want to put all my recipes on the computer." You know, she was a well-known dietitian and, you know, cooked at hospitals. She had tons of recipes. And I said, "Well, how often do you use them now? How often do you have to access them now?" You know, not very much, because she wasn't cooking for hospitals. She was just, you know, cooking for us.
Hmm.
And I said, "Well, how often do you think you'd have to go back and look at them? How many do you need to look for? You know, out of the hundreds that you have, how many do you need to go? I mean," and she told me that what the parameters were. I said, "Don't put on the computer. Just keep them where they are now. You'll save time." Um, and I'm assuming a lot of people say, "Let's use Chat GPT to help us." Help you how? What's the result you're trying to create? Or you just want to be part of your friends? You want to brag to your friend you're using it, or you just want to get some buzz that you have it? You know, I was doing AI stuff way back in that university, way back in 1982,
Mhm.
and up until very recently, when I would talk AI with my friends, you know, the back of my head, I was thinking, we're doing that back when I was a teenager. How come they can't do things better yet? Well, now they are. You know, none of my programs would paint a picture for you,
Yeah.
but it could pretend to be someone on the other end of the line. You wouldn't be able to tell it from a non-person that you were
Yeah.
talking to. Um, so flexibility, yes, but flexibility just to be flexible, that's not a reason either. You have
Mhm.
to have that. You have to have the right destination in mind to be able to make the right course corrections to get there. Right. So a discussion at GPT at your place, that should be something that should be very natural. We're trying to do this. Will that help us? That should be the way it would be brought up. Right.
Right.
If it's brought up a different way of, I want to use this, find a place to use it. Well, that's kind of backwards.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I think there's some interesting stuff. One of the most interesting use cases I've heard so far was around the idea of um, integrating it in a way where it would do all of the code documentation that needed to be done to
Yeah,
free up the developers from having to do that.
there's been a lot of stuff out there over the last 20 years in incremental improvements there. For example, going going through and making, you know, mapping out how the different variables are used or what the different memory locations are, um, doing an analysis of how efficient the code is, you know, that
Mhm.
kind of stuff. I think those kinds of applications for the new generation of AI is really quite interesting, right? You could say, take this code, make it 10% more efficient. And it'll come
Mhm.
back to you in a day or two and say, here you go. Or
Yeah.
depending on how big your code is. Well, what's happening is the people that are doing the AI are saying, hey, make yourself 10% more efficient. And so now you get some compounding improvements, right? The fear was always, I'm going to build two versions of my AI. I'm going to battle it out. you fight against this one, you fight against that one. If you win this one, analyze how to make yourself better, then fight again, then analyze how to get better. And then by having them fight each other, they get better. You know, you come back 3 days later and they're 50% better. You know, and because computers are fast, it may be we go to sleep one night and we wake up the next morning and it's 10 times better the next morning. You know, it's impossible to really guess where this is going to go. But that's just another reason.
I think what you're describing there is the fight between Mr. Incredible and Incrediboy in The Incredibles.
Well, yeah, that is one of the most perfect movies ever made. And guess what? It's an iterative approach about validated learning. And the only way to really make that work is to have that defined objective. And if you have that, then you can course correct to get there. So there you go. We just tied it all up together in a big bow for you.
That's right.
Now, the only thing about the chapter, it's kind of straightforward, but I do have two major metaphors competing for battle. There's the make your employees a pilot, and there's also make your employees a taxi driver. So I'm sure some of the readers are wondering, which one is it? But it's the idea that people need to have the ability to make decisions and to be flexible in how they get their jobs done. But I think the main thing about the chapter is that this approach is good for the business, but it's also good for the person, and it's good for the customers.
Now, see, the graphic that you'd want to put there is the graphic of Bruce Willis in The Fifth Element, because he was driving a flying taxi. So,
but a lot of things happen to him I wouldn't want to happen to me.
So, all right. The idea of course correction, we kind of got onto that here recently. So you do spend a lot of time talking about course correction in the book. I know a lot of organizations use some form of Agile, and they feel like they got to lay out the entire course first and then essentially tick off the milestones as they go. We kind of talked about that already a little bit. The fear they seem to have is that allowing the team to figure this out is tantamount to saying, we're just going to give the team, we're just going to pay the team and they don't even have to produce anything. And since we haven't told them what to produce, they're probably not going to produce anything.
Yeah, well, okay, so this gets to there's kind of this underlying topic in Agile circles that because the development team, specifically in software, or an Agile team somewhere else, a different part of the company, are able to learn and improve as they go, that business people should not get in their way and just let them do their thing. Kind of like development anarchy, I guess is a word for it. Well, I think that's stupid. I mean, I don't think there's a better word for it. It's just, you're just going to let some engineers just decide what they're going to do on their own and just, you know, go willy-nilly? No, the business people need to be the ones that, like, let's use the airplane analogy one more time. The president of the airline is, and the people that work for him are the ones that set the destinations. They're the ones that set the fares, right? They make sure the fuel can get, the fuel gets into the plane. They're the ones that make sure the plane has the right maintenance work. Once the plane takes off, then it's up to the pilot to get it there or to another destination based upon, like, if there are problems on the way. Mm-hmm. But you can't, what if you went onto an airplane, the pilot said, well, it said we were going to Orlando, but I have a girlfriend in Toronto, so we're going to go to Toronto. And the people on the plane, I don't have my passport with me. The pilot's all, too bad, that's where we're going to go. Or you know about there was a joke, I think it's true, it might just be a joke, about the man who went to his LAX and he was flying up to Oakland, and he this is the days before 2001. And he went up there and said, is this the plane for Oakland? They said, yes. He got on it, fell asleep, woke up 4 hours later, looked out of the plane. You know the story? No. He looked out of the plane and looked down and only saw water. And he said, I thought this was the plane to Oakland. Yeah, Oakland, New Zealand. Oh, Auckland, yeah. So my point is just that you can't have agile teams you can give them autonomy in the sense that they have accountability, right? I don't like the word autonomy. Let's call it stewardship. No one in the company should have complete autonomy. They should have defined stewardship. Even the CEO of the company has a stewardship. He reports to the board or to, shareholders, if it's a smaller, direct shareholders,
Right.
or, to her husband or to his wife, right? They report to somebody. You have to have that stewardship. Otherwise, you're going to just have people doing whatever, and you're going to end up with a bunch of junk that doesn't ship. I mean, I was involved peripherally with a lot of companies that every 2 weeks they had a different idea of what they wanted to make, and guess what? They didn't get any customers.
Mm-hmm.
They had a whole lot of really fun conversations. Let's make this. 2 weeks later, let's make this. Let's make that. That's not a way to run a business. It's also not a way to run a life, right? You have to have some goals defined in such a way that you can be flexible in how you fulfill them, but are defined enough that you know how to make your decisions.
Right.
If nothing else, the objectives help you make the decisions along the way. Otherwise, it's just arbitrary.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like the analogy that I like to use a lot is, working out, because I like to work out. So I often tell people, like when I set a goal for one of the compound lifts that I'm going to do, I know that I'm going to eventually achieve that goal. I'll even set a date. Like I want to achieve this by the end of this year, right? I want to be able to do a 550-pound squat by December 31st of this year, right? That's an example of one of my goals.
Well, here's
But
a really good example for that, right? You work out, you're successful at it. I know that you go to the gym on a regular basis. What if I were to come to you and say, hey, what should I do? What's the first thing you're going to ask?
what's your goal?
Yep.
What do you want to do?
Yeah, I can't tell you what to do unless I know what you want to achieve, right? You want to build muscle? Do you want to lose weight? Do you want to increase endurance?
Yep.
You have to know what your objective is in order to make decisions.
Yep. That's exactly right.
And you can't have people in an organization be so autonomous they don't report to anybody. Mm-hmm. That's ridiculous. But I've heard it many times in agile circles about, don't tell us what to do. We know for ourselves. Well, even if you're the smartest people in the world, you're going to be wrong.
So I think this is something that's really important to dig into, because I think there's a misunderstanding about exactly what we mean when we say set a goal. And I know that we're going to address this in a later chapter, but since we're having the conversation now, I kind of like to talk about it right now, because there is this misunderstanding, I think, especially in leadership circles, where people fail to really understand what it means to set a goal in an agile sense with their product versus defining features and all of the stories that lead up to them.
Right. So you want to describe the goal in terms of the outcome. Mm-hmm. So back 20 years ago, I was a VP of marketing. And I would set a goal like become number one in this segment of the market. And that segment, I was at a company that was making test equipment. It's as boring as possible, so it's easy to use as an example. It's a tool. That's all it really was. A $30,000 tool, sometimes $100,000 tool, but that's all it really was. Well, if I wanted to go after the people that were using these protocol analyzers for PCI Express, the buses that are in the computers, my goal would be something like, and it was become number one in this segment, meaning sell more analyzers in this technology than any of my competitors. That was my goal one year. Well, does that say anything about the features? Does it say how many releases I need to have? Does it say what the price needs to be? Does it say anything? No, that's the end result I want to create. I don't care if I get there by selling a shoebox and with a couple of wires popping out of it. Right? well, that wouldn't have worked. It looked kind of like a shoebox, but we had to go find out what are the features people really want. What's the price they're willing to pay? What kind of partnerships do I need to make? What conferences do I need to speak at? What customers do I need to get really close to? Now those are, then you get down to the next layer of questions and you do that. I'd much rather have 2 software releases and maybe 1 hardware release that gets me to the top than have 15 releases. In the end, the customers don't care how many releases you have, don't care how many features you have, as long as you have the ones that they need.
Yep.
So it might be, if you're a software company, that like a SaaS software company, you might be get 5,000 new customers. It might be, acquire 10% more of the market share. It might be, if you're a small company just starting, it might be get 5 large customers. So because we need the view to our investors that we're making progress.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe 10,000 nobodies isn't important in that case. Maybe you have to have 5 big name customers. Well, whatever it is, you have to define what it is in a way that doesn't dictate the way that you get there.
Yeah. Yep. And I think that's something that a lot of people just fundamentally don't understand about the setting of the goal. It has to be, you have to define what it is that you want to achieve at the end versus defining all the things that you are going to do in the meantime.
Yeah, the strategy chapter of the book goes into a lot of detail on that. In fact, there's one place where we have this is a good goal, this is a better goal, this is the best goal on that topic, right? On how to define something that gives you the flexibility needed to achieve it.
All right, that's all the questions that I had for you. I don't know if you had anything else that you wanted to bring up about this chapter.
No, the main thing about this chapter is just the pitch of, trying to show how the 2 case studies fit together and make a pitch of that this is the best thing for everybody. And there's one quote in it that I really like, and this is from someone that was using Agile at a small marketing company doing advertising stuff with software back from 8 years ago. And he said, shift from command and control to empowerment. And that's pretty succinct. And that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Now, I wouldn't use empowerment isn't really an Agile word, but people know what that means. We would say, in my book, I would say, define the objectives, give the stewardship to empower. I would say empower, wouldn't I? To allow them to achieve their goal. Maybe I would probably say that would allow them. Yeah, okay. Doesn't really matter the words. It just matters the concept.
That's right.
But I like the way that this particular quote, the command and control manner, that goes back to the whole military thing, right? They want to have command and control. But what worked at D-Day, it was not command and control. It was that improvisation that was going on.
All right. And so now we're going to be going into chapter 4, which is the Lean and Agile Primer. This is a different section of the book. Is there anything that you want to prep the listeners for chapter 4?
I think if you have the book, I really like the quotes I have in the introduction to the next section. These are people I interviewed and said, which principles do you wish you had at a previous company? If you have the book, look at those again and ask yourself the same question, right? What was wrong with that company you thought was going to do so much better but didn't? And if you could insert one Agile principle in there to make a difference, what would you put in there? The main thing in the book is I use a lot of ideas from my career and from people I knew, and again, also from research I did, but I want to get people to the point where they realize that they can draw on their own experiences as teaching lessons on this topic. Because if they're going to make the pitch in their own companies about how to do stuff, they should be using their own examples instead of mine. And chapter 4 is probably I don't want to say the most boring chapter, but it's kind of the most straightforward chapter, because I'm going to define what lean is, I'm going to define what agile is, and how the two sit on top of each other and what the different pieces are. But the interesting part about chapter 1 is where I go heretic and explain that these are the principles of the Agile Manifesto, and this is why they're all wrong. So that's kind of the preview.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Well, we'll look forward to getting into chapter 4 and then having a discussion afterwards.
All right. Thanks, Zach.
Thanks, James.